Bienvenidos a Logística de las Cosas, donde traemos los temas generales y los llevamos a la logística. Hoy tendremos un episodio muy especial. Tenemos aquí a Lars Jensen y será un episodio en inglés totalmente. Lars Jensen, thank you for joining us.
Buenos dias. Thank you for having me here.
It's our pleasure to have you here. So tell us, for anybody that has been hiding under a rock and doesn't know you in the logistics business, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Lars Jensen. I've been in container shipping now for 24 years. Started out as chief analyst in Maersk Line way back in 2001 and spent a lot of good years with Maersk learning the ropes on how container shipping works. And then I've been an independent consultant ever since 2011. And I tend to spend most of my time in this fascinating industry simply trying to figure out not just what is going on, but what is going to happen weeks, months, years, decades down the line.
So you're a fortune teller for shipping and logistics.
I am desperately trying to say I have the crystal ball, but especially here in 2025, I don't think anybody in their right mind would claim what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone a year from now.
Definitely. We were speaking before camera, and you told me that your main career is nothing involved with logistics. Would you please explain that?
Well, at least my background has nothing to do with it. My background is a PhD in theoretical physics. So I was trying to figure out the secrets of the universe until I realized the secrets of how much money you make in academia and thought I would find a different career.
So how do you get into shipping, being a physicist?
Purely by accident. As I said, I needed to do something else with my education, and by pure coincidence, I ended up in Maersk's oil and gas division. I mean, that's a place where you need engineers and people who know their way around mathematical modeling, which was fun for a few years, got bored, and then by, again, pure coincidence, Maersk Line wanted a chief analyst to be the guy to do the forecasting. And I knew absolutely nothing about line of shipping, yet the boss who was hiring at the time apparently thought that I could learn fairly rapidly. So I got the job, somewhat to my surprise, to be the guru of forecasting of Maersk Line. That was back in 2001.
Did it scare you to make that jump? I mean, going into the empty and something you don't know as well?
No, because I figured what's the worst thing that could happen? That was that they didn't like what I was doing. Then they would fire me and I would find something else to do.
Interesting. That's like open to challenge.
Yeah, exactly.
So what was the toughest thing for you in that area? What did you find difficult to do and how did you overcome it?
The difficult thing, I mean, early on, of course, it was trying to figure out what actually works. And to my great benefit, Maersk as a company is very much in tune with also you need to go out in the real world and see how that works. So there's a lot of support for me to visit other Maersk offices, learn the ropes. And then again, this is where my mathematical background comes in and say, well, I was looking very literally at my job was to improve forecasting. And whilst most people would think that means you need to be perfect in forecast, that there is no such thing. That doesn't exist. So I thought, okay, if I'm going to improve, what is the level of forecasting we're dealing with right now? So I quite literally went into the basement and pulled out old reports in terms of what was being forecasted and similarly old reports, what then happened. And then I could prove that this was not very good at all. Actually, it was random numbers at the time. And so fine, we can put something simple in. Here's a long-term average. Yes, it's a poor forecast, but guess what? It's better than where we started. So now we're starting from a baseline, and then you can gradually build more and more on top. The thing about forecasting is not that you're right, which sounds very, very odd. The most important thing about forecasting is that people take it serious what you're saying. Because if people don't take it serious, you can have the most accurate forecast in the world, but people won't listen to it. And if they don't listen to it, they don't make any decisions based on it, and then it's completely worthless. So you need to combine having a forecast with an explanation that people can buy in board and say, yes, that actually sounds reasonable and credible and plausible. Then it might not necessarily, after the end of the day, be the most accurate forecast. But if you're forecasting, sake of argument, market is going to grow 5%. Yeah, it might have grown 4%. It might have grown 6%. That was not really going to change any decisions in a major way anyway. What does matter is if you say 5% and everybody else says minus 5%, then it becomes important. Because if they listen to you, they will take one type of decision. If they listen to the minus 5, they will take a completely different type of decision. Because getting these large movements right, that is a lot more important than whether you get the decimal points right. And then again, people need to buy into the credibility to actually listen to what you say. Sometimes I've been teaching this stuff as well, and I keep telling people, if you do forecasts, if you do market analysis, intelligence for anyone, you always have to be able to pinpoint and say, the reports I'm making, the numbers I'm making, which specific decision does it influence? Because if you can't say that, then you're just wasting your time. Because at the end of the day, forecasts is about influencing decisions. So people need to listen. Otherwise, why do it in the first place? So I spent a lot of the time there, also focused exactly on how do I convey what I find in the numbers to something that you can actually explain and make sense of.
Okay, so it's basically you bring the numbers in and then you keep context to the numbers.
Yes.
And the why goes to the description goes to the prescription, basically.
Exactly. I mean, one of the more really simplistic examples I usually come up with is two examples. One example is you're standing in the middle of the road. There's a truck driving down on you. It's going 60 miles an hour. It's a mile away. My prediction is in exactly 60 seconds, you will be run over and you're dead. Now, you will then take that forecast. You will step off the road and the truck goes nicely by. Now, my forecast was completely wrong because you're not dead. But it was a credible forecast. You used it. It actually created value, even though it turned out to be wrong.
Butterfly effect.
Yeah, but then you have the other one. You're now standing in the middle of an open field. There is nothing around you for miles. Nothing is happening. Flat earth, there is nothing. And I just tell you, run. Run right now, or in 10 seconds you will be dead. You'll be looking at me confused and say, what on earth are you talking about? The sinkhole then opens up underneath you, swallows you, and you are dead. Now my forecast was completely accurate, but because I didn't provide a context for you to understand it in, you didn't act upon it.
Okay. Yeah, the context is very important.
Yes.
So taking that into account, let's get into the matter. What would be your forecast for Dominican Republic right now?
The forecast for Dominican Republic, there are several elements to it. First of all, Dominican Republic is not a master of its own destiny in what is going on in the supply chains right now, not even by a long shot. Dominican Republic is going to be subjected to the forces of volatility in the global supply chain that everyone right now is feeling. And it comes from multiple different fronts. Obviously, the largest storm front right now is the trade war that started from the US. You also got a storm front coming from the vagaries of what goes on in the Red Sea. You got a storm front coming from what is lining up to be more infighting between some of the large carriers. You have the reassignment of the different alliances. All of these macro phenomena plays out mainly on a global stage, mainly around East-West trade. So Asia, North America, transatlantic, Asia, Europe. And bring it eventually, well, what do you care here in the Dominican Republic? Because a lot of the backbone services you are tied into are services that are run by the major carriers. They make their decisions not based on the Dominican Republic. It's a wonderful place. It's my second time here. But you don't really play a role in that decision-making process. Just like, out of the 193 countries in the world, probably 170, 180 of them out there have no say because each individually are relatively small pieces of the puzzle.
It's economies of scale.
It's economies of scale. So for the Dominican Republic, it's also a matter of realizing you are in a turmoil, not of your own making, and a turmoil you can't necessarily do much about, but a turmoil you then need to navigate and say, fine, if the name of the game is we can't solve the problem, how do we then go with the flow and deal with the problem?
Excellent. So it's basically learning the dance moves and going with the rhythm.
Something to that effect, yes. Or you can also say the usual thing is, well, you're stuck in a raging torrent going downhill. You can either try to fight it or you can try to gather enough flotsam to build yourself a small raft and actually come nicely down the river.
Excellent. So basically we had to learn to read the panorama and learn how to act according to it and learn to how to react, because we're more reacting than acting.
Yeah, it's not a matter of just reacting. It's also a matter of saying, in that storm that is coming, what new opportunities are opening up? What does it require to be able to then tap into those opportunities?
So going outside of the Dominican Republic, this panorama that's forming the Houthis, Trump, what's happening, like you said, with India and Pakistan, how does that revolve and affect our commerce?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first most important thing is that all of this uncertainty is not going to go away anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, some of these conflicts might be resolved, but there will be other equally important conflicts that will then rise up. What that spells is an enormous amount of uncertainty. That uncertainty means that the world we knew of the last few decades, where fine, I can set up my supply chain, I can source from a particular location. China was in favor for a while. Now it seems to be moving somewhat to India. But what this increasing degree of unpredictability means is the supply chain is going to be a lot more diversified. If I'm, say, a retailer, my only way of building some resilience is I need to be able to source from a lot more locations than I used to. That means that manufacturing is going to be more spread out across the world than we've been used to. I'm not saying it's going to be nearshore back to US or to Europe. It's not. It's going to be spread out more across Indian subcontinent. To some degree, few places in Africa. South America, Caribbean, Central America might also be beneficiaries. But here's then the whole deal. As the supply chain gets more diversified, from a liner network perspective, that actually means you are going to rely more on some of your hub and spoke operations. Because as you increase the number of, let's call them interesting port pairs, you have millions of port pairs out there, but the interesting ones are where there's actually any meaningful volumes moving. As the number of interesting port pairs increase, you will increasingly be in a situation you cannot serve them all directly. So that's actually going to create more interesting opportunities also for hub and spoke operations. And that brings us back to, for example, Dominican Republic. If you look at this region, right now there are basically 5 locations that are interesting from that perspective.
Yeah.
There's here in Dominican Republic, you've got Freeport up in Bahamas, you've got Kingston, you've got Cartagena, and you've got Panama. That's basically the game. It is hard to see the emergence suddenly of a 6th large transshipment hub or major free trade zone that is not already in the works here. So the name of the game here over the next 5, 10, 15 years is you are likely going to see more of these transshipment operations, more of these also free trade zone operations in this region. But when you then analyze network dynamics, I'm not so sure that the market is large enough to actually have 5 equally large players. So the way I also see it is the game is on and has been on for quite a while between these 5 entities I mentioned in terms of who are going to be the larger ones of these, because there might not in the very long term be enough room for all 5.
Interesting. So that means we better buck up and start investing in our ports and getting more attention, because if not, we're going to be left behind.
If not, then you're going to be left behind. And this is, of course, a challenging game to play, because anyone that's in this game say, no, we're going to hang back, we're not going to invest. That is almost a surefire way of making sure you are leaving the dance long term. If you then invest and grow, that in itself is not a guarantee that you will be the winner of the game. That's, of course, the dangerous part. This is not the only region where this is happening. I think a good example of the first really large global transshipment hub that has been left behind now would be Hong Kong. Hong Kong used to be a key transshipment gateway. Now, especially after the carriers have realigned themselves into the new alliances, Hong Kong barely features at all as a transshipment hub on the networks. And I think they're just a harbinger of what we're going to see unfold over the next decade or 2.
So we talked about the ports. Can we then talk about the liner integrations, the carriers, and how, for example, a shipping agent, which is some people think that this is a business that is disappearing, but on the other hand, there are other people who think there are still a lot of opportunities for shipping agents in the global market. What's your take on that?
Yeah, first of all, it seems to have been waxing and waning a little bit over the decades in terms of whether agents were in vogue or whether they were not in vogue in terms of the carriers believe they could do it all themselves. I don't think it's an either or. Overall, I believe if you're looking at the really genuinely large markets, yes, the carriers will, and to a large degree are doing it themselves, have been doing it for many years. The challenge is when you get to niche markets like the ones down here, very often there is a clear value case to be made from having local knowledge. We are in an era where we talk a lot about, for example, technology. Say, fine, why do I even need an agent? I can just put it up in an app and you can book everything online and you can service yourself. That is true. I mean, in theory, we don't need any salespeople. We don't need any agents. We need nothing. You should go on the website. But here's the problem. What happens when something goes wrong? Or what happens when the customer needs a service that is not easily automatable? That is where the value proposition comes in. That's where in this increasingly electronic world, the main competitive element is not going to be on the technology. All the carriers, by the way, also all the forwarders, they will have good technology. The key differentiation here is going to be on the people in terms of how do you then help with the supply chain, either when something unique is needed that doesn't fit the mold, or when something no longer goes according to plan A, irrespective of how it happened, how can we then deal with it? So especially in smaller markets where even if you are some of the largest global carriers, you might not have that local expertise. I could certainly see there would still be a market for some of the agents as well, provided those agents really have that very specialized local knowledge that is hard to replicate.
So it's like the saying, I as a BCO or customer don't care what technology you have. I care how you solve my problem and how efficiently you do it. That's it.
I might even take it a step further if I'm a BCO. I mean, this might be stretching a little bit, but as a BCO, I don't want to know you exist. Because if everything goes according to plan, although I book my cargo, I don't even know you exist. The moment I know you exist is likely because something has gone wrong. Then if I'm a reasonably professional BCO, I know there's a million things that could go wrong. That's neither the fault of the logistics provider or the agent or the carrier. That could be a storm. That could be an engine that blew up. Fine. But what I then want is, then I should be able to rely on you actually being there and solving my problems.
So bringing it further, we were talking before about shipping line integrations. How do you see the panorama building up in the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, with shipping line integrations, they're both integrations between shipping lines. Then you got the vertical ones either to logistics or to terminals. So if we look between the carriers first, I think the game is almost up amongst the major container lines, but there's going to be more consolidation on the regional carriers also in this region in the coming years. It's been somewhat on hold for a while, but that's more due to the turmoil of the last 5 years. If you look at the terminals, I can also see a scenario where shipping lines will own more stakes in more terminals, at least the ones that are critical to their networks. On the logistics side, that's a bit of a mixed bag because right now we have the whole gamut from, at one hand, we have a Maersk with a integrated logistics strategy to a Hapag-Lloyd that doesn't really do much more down to the part ownership, of course, of Klaus-Michael Kühne of Kühne & Nagel. And then you have someone in between, like, for example, CMA or MSC with CEVA and Medlock. What I see this driving towards is I am not a fan, never have been a fan of the integrated logistics approach. I'm not sure it's ever going to completely work. So I would expect to see, for example, a Maersk take a step back and spin off the logistics. They will still do logistics, but more have the models like you see with CMA and MSC, for example.
Okay, so and do you see an outside player coming in and buying one of these lines?
That could potentially happen, depending a little bit on who you call an outside player here. If you're talking, say, major capital funds for the large global carriers, not really, because a capital fund needs a company that can be, say, it's a turnaround case and you sell it in 5 years. None of the major carriers right now fall into that category. If you're looking at the existing landscape, I would look at players such as DP World, Abu Dhabi Ports Group. I would not be surprised if you see some Saudi entities potentially come up, want to get into this market. In the short term, they would have to contend with buying small to medium-sized regional carriers, which is also what they've been doing. If we speculate really long term, and here I'm talking beyond 10 years, not inside 10 years, but beyond 10 years, you could potentially see some of this shift. One of my own personal theories is if you look at a carrier like a Maersk Line, for example, If you look at the owners of Maersk Line, at least the majority owner, the family holding group, they are building up a portfolio of green technology companies. Personally, I think they're going to be successful in doing that. And if you then fast forward 10, 15, 20 years down the line, if you then have a very large portfolio of green tech companies is going very, very well, the obvious question is, if you're a green tech company, why do you need a shipping line? And that question is no different than the question that then arose, if you're that shipping line, why do you need a supermarket, which they sold off? Why do you need an oil company, which they also sold off? So Maersk has a history of reinventing themselves over there more than 100 years and selling off when you got a portfolio company that doesn't match. I would not rule out a company like Maersk Line could be such a portfolio company, again, not inside 10 years, but 10, 15, 20 years out. That would then be the potential in for other players, such as, for example, DP World or Abu Dhabi Ports Group, to go in, say that is their way in to the top 10. Because we also have to be realistic here. If you want to be a global, I wouldn't even say top 10 anymore, probably need to see top 8 or top 9. If you want to be in that group, you cannot grow up there organically. That is simply not possible. The only way in would be to acquire one of the existing players.
Do you keep seeing them as a global players in the coming years, or do you see them regionalized?
Yeah, that's part of the challenge, because they all want to continue to be global players, but this is where geopolitics come in and can make life extremely difficult. Depends. I mean, if we're really strict, no one is a global player today. My usual go-to example is, if you as a shipping line wants to service North Korea, sure, you can do that. But that would also guarantee you can't service any other country in the world. So already today, you have to choose North Korea or the rest of the world. That's an easy choice, of course. But as the geopolitical turmoil heats up, this could potentially become a lot more problematic. If we had this conversation 2 or 3 months ago, actually I had this conversation with a few people back then, and my go-to example there was, imagine 5 to 10 years from now, you're then being told you need to choose. If you are calling ports in China, you cannot call ports in Taiwan, or the other way around. Given the political tensions, this is not a scenario that would be completely unreasonable to at least envision. That would then suddenly make it difficult. What does it then mean to be a global carrier? Now fast forward to where we are today. With, for example, the USTR proposals and the Ships for America Act, again, I'm not saying it's where we are right now, but suddenly it's not out of the realm of the possible to suddenly see the U.S. say, we don't want to see Chinese carriers coming to the U.S. And again, that is going to lead to a potential path where global shipping lines might be forced to choose that if there's a certain basket of countries you serve, there might be another basket of countries you cannot serve. This is more a challenge for the global carriers. We will still see global trade. That just means that you're going to have freight forwarders that's going to bridge the gap. So fine, carrier A will take you from the first country to a transshipment hub, and carrier B will take you onwards. This is what shipping has also been doing. I was about to say for decades, but in reality for centuries, moving cargo between countries that de facto are saying they're not trading with each other, but in reality are. You just need some intermediaries. But it is going to make the landscape more complicated.
So you recommend, for example, a freight forwarder to start specializing on certain trades and routes, taking this into account?
Yeah, to some degree, I would say forwarders have to make a choice. Now, again, we make it sound very black and white, but if I look across the world, we got far too many forwarders. It depends on how you count. Either you got tens of thousands or you got hundreds of thousands. It depends a bit on how you count. And that's far too many. There's already a consolidation phase ongoing. And what I see here is either you go really big and you basically already are.
DSV route.
Large ones. Yeah, for example. So you have to be extremely large. That gives you some scale benefits. Or you are a niche forwarder that has a very well protected niche. Either you have some geographical advantage, regulatory advantage. You might have some customers with some very specialized needs that you are extremely good at adapting to. It might be commodities that are difficult to deal with. There's an enormous amount of these niches. And the very big ones, they'll do fine. These niche ones, they will also do fine. But it's the whole middle segment that needs to sit down and think very carefully about how are they going to compete of the world of tomorrow. Because are they really big enough to compete on scale with the truly large guys? That is going to be extremely difficult. On the other hand, if you have a very good niche, you might be better off instead of saying, well, we need to grow because everybody needs to grow. In some cases, that might actually not be the right thing to do. It might be a matter of saying, no, we actually have an extremely well-defended and very profitable niche. We're going to be even better in defending that niche because that way we're not going to have to compete with the big guys head on cost or scale.
So, but taking that into account, the factor inflation is the reason why you always keep growing. How do you treat that when you're focused on a niche and the niche market is small and it won't grow?
Yeah, but here's the next thing. This is where I think the last 5 years have been extremely interesting. We've been so accustomed over the decades, when we talk freight, for example, that freight constantly got cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. But that's not really the case over the last 5 years. I mean, sure, everything has been enormously volatile, to put it mildly.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, rate levels have been going up again. And I know there's probably a lot of, especially BCOs, that are not really going to like to hear this. But if we look before the pandemic, whenever rates went up or down $200, that was a matter of there would be a major debate. And if you went to BCO and said, I'm going to increase your rates by $400, you would hear a lot about that. Then you're going to put me out of business. Okay. Fast forward to 2022. Some cases, freight rates went up by $20,000. Did that lead somebody to go out of business? It certainly did.
Mm-hmm.
But did it lead global trade to stop? Certainly not. We moved more freight globally than ever before, despite freight rates being 10 times higher than what they usually were. To me, that was also a very, very clear example that it is a myth that freight rates necessarily, structurally, always, forever will go down. There is clearly a willingness to pay if need be out there. And that then brings to the question, do you always need to grow? Well, if you are in a specialized niche that really requires special knowledge that nobody else can really replicate, you might not necessarily be locked in that downward spiral on pricing.
Interesting way of looking at it. We're coming up on the 30 minutes, so we're almost at a close. Is there a message you would like to leave with our audience, for example, for any people starting in the logistics or shipping business or starting their career? Maybe some sage advice that you would like to share?
I mean, the first thing I would basically say is, I mean, from personal experience, I find this to be one of the most phenomenal industries in the world to work in. And one of the reasons is precisely because of its complexity. Seen from the outside, it might seem relatively boring. We're moving boxes from point A to point B. How hard can that be? As it turns out, it can be incredibly difficult. And being a part of that and figuring out how do you then navigate all of these curveballs? I was mentioning before, right? During the pandemic, we moved more freight than ever before in history. Mm-hmm. Then navigating the Red Sea crisis, now navigating the trade war. We could either choose to be dejected and look negatively. Oh my God, all these things that go wrong. I look at it differently. These are all challenges, and every single time we had these challenges, the supply chains provides opportunities, and a lot of companies are able to navigate this very successfully.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Lars. It was my pleasure having you here.
Well, entirely my pleasure being here.
And for you guys, it's up to the next one. Hasta la próxima.